There is some stuff in here that's worth praising. There's some stuff in here that's interesting. But overall, I would just say it's like a regular book in the Cosmere at around 50% enjoyment. You know, the characters are about 50% as interesting and likable. The setting and the magic system is about 50% as in-depth and 50% as cool. The storyline is about 50% as interesting, 50% as fast-paced. It's all the same stuff that we're used to, but just at a lower level. So the plot to this one is actually pretty simple and easy to follow. There are these two kingdoms which are... they have a lot of tension between them, essentially, and so the king of one, Idris, sends his daughter, a princess named Ciri, to Halandren to marry the god king of Halandren. And her older sister... Now, Ciri was actually not supposed to go. Her older sister was the one that was supposed to, and so her older sister, Vivenna, decides, you know what, my sister shouldn't be there, so she runs off to Halandren to try and rescue her. And while this is going on, there is another god living in Halandren named Lightsong, who is just experiencing some political stuff going on. It's left pretty vague even while you're reading it, and he's just thinking, okay, there's some sort of conspiracy happening here, but he doesn't know exactly what it is, and it doesn't play into the story much until near the end. And finally, there is a guy named Vasher who is running around with a talking sword, and he is also up to something that we don't really know about until near the end. Probably my biggest issue with this book is the plot, because, like I said, it's about 50% of what a Cosmere plot is normally like. You know, it's 50% as fun, 50% as enjoyable. Because Ciri's storyline, where she's just in the palace being married to the God King, is pretty boring at first. Because at first it's just her kind of wandering around, taking in the sights, and, well, that's about it. You know, there's hints that there might be some stuff brewing for later, but there's not much happening right then. And later on, as she gets to know the God King better, it becomes more interesting, but that's character-driven rather than plot-driven. So her storyline is really bad. Lightsong's, which I already kind of mentioned, again, it gets better near the end, but for the most part, it's just him kind of hanging around, drinking wine and stuff, and Lightsong himself is not a very interesting character. I'll get to that in a minute. But, yeah, his storyline isn't that great. And then we've got Vasher's storyline, which is not even really a storyline, because he's not in this a lot until the last third. For the first two-thirds, he only pops in every now and again, and he just kind of gets into trouble, and we don't know what he's doing, so he's not that interesting either. The only storyline that was consistently pretty good was Vivenna's, because after she arrives in Halandren, she just meets up with this group of mercenaries who are working for her father, the king of Idris, or Idrian. I already forgot, I'm sorry. But they're working for her father, and so she's helping them with the war effort, essentially, because they're thinking, okay, a war's going to start soon, let's try and make sure it goes our way. And so Vivenna's storyline is actually pretty interesting because there's always some stuff going on. It's still not amazing, but it is pretty good. There are two really big twists in this story, which I won't go into a lot of detail now, I'll save that for the spoiler section. But one of them, the first one to happen, is pretty good as well, and it happens in Vivenna's storyline, which is part of what makes it a good storyline, and it works because, you know, there are hints leading up to it, and then when it happens, it caught me off guard. I was thinking, wow, that actually shocked me, that's a good twist. The second twist is just, it's not very good. Like, it caught me off guard, but there also wasn't much leading up to it, so it just kind of comes out of nowhere, and you're thinking, oh, well, alright, that's cool, I guess. I think the biggest single issue with the plot is that there isn't really a villain until near the end. Which, I know I keep mentioning near the end, and that's because the climax is still pretty good. You know, it's not on the level of something like Mistborn or Stormlight Archive, but it's a pretty good climax. And because that's when, you know, villains pop up. And until then, we don't really have one. It's just the characters wandering around doing stuff. You know, they don't have like the Kingdom of Halandren itself isn't a villain, and they don't really have any individuals that are villains or organizations. It's just them doing stuff. So, and honestly, I would say that villains is one area where Sanderson kind of struggles. Not that they're terrible, just that out of all the aspects of his writing that I love, villains usually aren't one of them. You know, he has a couple of really good ones, like in Elantris and the Stormlight Archives, he has some great ones, but other than that, it's just, they're not that interesting. And so Warbreaker is a pretty good showcase of that. And as for the main characters, they're, again, they're about 50% of what you'd expect, with the exception of Vivenna. I'll talk about her in a sec. But Lightsong is actually less than 50%. He's really annoying, is the thing. Like, he's built up to be like this wisecracking Joker guy, and he's just kind of lazy and lounges around, and he's sarcastic, and he's clearly meant to be funny, but he's not funny. None of his jokes landed, okay? I don't think I even cracked a smile reading this. It's just, he just came across as an obnoxious prick, honestly. That's it. And he redeems himself a bit at the end when he becomes, you know, more serious and he becomes a better person. He becomes worthy of the power he has, but that really doesn't make up for all the annoying conversations he has with all the people around him before then. And then there's Ciri, who is... she's alright, you know, she is just a scared kid that gets thrust into a situation she doesn't want to be in, and then she kind of makes the most of it, and she does a lot of growing up over the course of the story, and again, she's not, like, particularly interesting, but she's a likable person, you know, she's a decent person, and she does some good, so, again, she's fine. That's really all I can say about her, she's fine. And Vivenna, on the other hand, is actually really good, because she starts off as kind of, or at least she seems like a very mature young woman. Like, okay, she's very educated, she has herself under control, but as the story goes on, she realizes that she's actually a pretty naive person. She doesn't know a lot about the world. And as it goes on, she becomes much tougher, much stronger, and just realizes, you know what, I wasn't really cut out to be a princess, maybe. And so that struggle between her wanting to continue to be the old princess that she always had been and her wanting to be this new person is actually really interesting, and watching her become smarter, become tougher, is also really cool. And of course, I can't talk about a Sanderson book without mentioning the setting and the magic, and those are, again, fine. You know, like, the setting, I didn't really get a feel for it the way I did in the Stormlight Archive, or in Mistborn, or in Elantris. It's just kind of these two kingdoms that we know about, and we know about one city where most of the story takes place in, the capital of Halandren, and the thing is, it doesn't feel that much like a distinct city. You know, it has character to it. There is some talk of the unique culture that it has, and, well, no, that's mostly it. Well, no, it talks a little bit about the economy, too. There's that, but it's just not really all that deep. You know, there's not that much depth to it, and I didn't feel like I was immersed in this alien world. Like, the first Mistborn book also mostly took place in one city, but that was a wholly weird city, okay? It was huge. There were, you know, gangs and thieves running around all over the place. There was, you know, allomancy, the crazy magic that was going on. The whole place was ruled by an immortal demigod. He had his goons wandering around. Like, there was a lot of stuff in Luthadel that was really, really cool, which is missing here. And segueing into the magic system, that's also kinda neat, but it's missing something. You know, it needs to take a couple extra steps in order to become as good as something like allomancy or stormlight, because in this, the way magic works is that every person is born with something called breath, and that's kind of like their soul, but not really, because if you take it from them, then they still live. And the thing about breath is, you know, you can't forcibly take it from someone, they have to give it to you. And, you know, you can stock up a whole bunch of breaths, so you have, you know, hundreds or even thousands of them. And you can, the most interesting thing you can do with it is put it into objects to make them sort of come to life, and then you can retrieve the breath from it later. So, for example,